painting the best metal Mephiston model on the internet. All right, so last year I missed out on Olden Demon, but I really wanted to paint one of my old models for this competition. So I started digging around, and I found this old metal Mephiston model. It's got the back banner, which I must have just assembled it that way, and I didn't cut the back banner off like you're supposed to, but I'm going to paint him up for Olden Demon. When approaching Olden Demon, you kind of have two options. You go full nostalgia and try to mimic the old style, the old way of doing things, the old heavy metal style, or you do a real modern take on it. So I'm going to go that route. I've wanted to paint this model to the best of my ability for 20 years. So I'm going to try to really do my old self proud, my younger self my younger self proud. If that makes more sense. So I'm going to go for a high contrast, really dark darks and really bright brights, and try to just punch this model up as much as I possibly can. So let's get into it. First thing I jumped in on was the face. Now this face is one of the coolest, if not the coolest faces from back in the day. He's got really exaggerated cheekbones. His eyebrows are really high, big arching eyebrows, but somehow it still works. At this point, I'm really feeling out the model, getting used to the contours of the face, his nose, eyebrows, cheekbones, jawline, all that, just trying to feel it out, adding a little bit more paint here. But this face is a major focal point for the model, and I want to make sure that I honor each of the shapes of the sculpt. So I'd say I'm about 80% done with the face at this point. You'll notice a really strong highlight on the right side and a darker shadow to the left. And this is intentional. I'm not trying to highlight the whole face uniformly. I want a strong light coming from the right side. So moving on to some of the red areas. One of my issues with how this model's painted historically is the red armor and the red robe or skirt or whatever you want to call it. They look too similar, so I want to distinguish the two a little bit. So the red robe is going to be more of the true red, and it's not going to be very reflective. So I'm base coating this right now with blood red from AK Interactive, and I do multiple coats, maybe 5 or 6 coats, just really blocking in that red. And you'll notice here his left leg, or like his left thigh, is the band of light I'm trying to run down the whole model. So that's where I'm going to really add a lot more coats. I do ended up highlighting this a little bit more, but I really want this blood red color to be the main focus, the main push. So here the robes are once they're completed. I said I added a little bit of highlight to the right side of that leg, but you can tell that it's a true red. I'm not trying to go into any pinks or oranges. Now the red armor is going to be ultra reflective. So the base coat of this armor is wine red by AK Interactive, and now I'm working with this blood red again. And you'll notice I'm just doing a band of red following that right side highlight. And I'm really just pushing that into the crevices. I think some of the temptation on this model, because there are ribs to this muscle looking armor, the skinless muscle, is to paint each of those ribs dark. And you'll notice a trend here throughout the model is you want to push your mid-tone fully into that. You want to honor the shape. So this is kind of a sphere, and I want to make sure that there's kind of a band of highlight, or like a wedge of highlight that comes down. And so it gets smaller as it gets closer to that nipple, but I wanted to really make sure that band of red is there. And then underneath here, I'm adding a secondary reflection. And now I'm picking out the little ribs of the armor. Similar here to the robes, I'm doing multiple coats, but in contrast to the robes, I'm going to start adding more and more ice yellow and making this highlight look really bright and reflective. So now I'm adding about 50-50 ice yellow to this blood red. And now I'm going to just highlight the top side of these ribs. I'm going to keep the blood reds down in the recess and just pick out the little topmost section of each of these ribs with this mixture. Adding more ice yellow to the mix, and now it's more of a dot highlight. Only the very top section gets a little bit bigger, and then after this, just little dots. And I'll come back in with the final pure ice yellow and just really ping the brightest highlight. All right, one peg done. The last thing I need to kind of feel out is how I'm going to do all the gold on this model. All right, so I'm about 4 hours in now of painting, and on Mephiston here, I've blocked out a little bit of the red, a little bit of the armor, experimented a little bit on the gold. Trying some Pro Acryl, the Flameon colors. There's like a greenish brown. So I wanted to try that out. I think that would be complementary. Dark green brown. It's kind of like the main undertone for the gold, and I'm kind of on the fence about it. I do need to push, bigger highlight places and things, but I think as an initial test, it seems to somewhat work with everything. So I'm gonna keep plugging away here, maybe work on this pistol or something, and yeah, see how we do. I got out in the weeds on this pistol a little too much. Tried to overcomplicate something that shouldn't have been this complicated, but added the basic highlights in, and then the glowing green of the plasma coils, and I'll leave it as it is now. Got some glowing effects going here, but need to paint more of the model before I go too far into this. Just over 11 hours on this guy. Say his face, his armor is looking pretty good. Worked quite a bit on the pistol and his collar here. And start working on some more of the gold and his sweet trench coat, but so far looking pretty good, and I'm gonna just keep plugging away. At this point, I'm pretty confident with how the gold is looking, so I wanted to tackle this left shoulder pad. This is a dark green brown from Pro Acryl, the Flameon Signature Series. I know before I said I was kind of on the fence about it, but it does provide a nice contrast with all the red going on. So this gold definitely feels more cool than I was initially planning, but I think it works out pretty well. So you'll notice here that I'm being pretty heavy-handed with this. I'm trying to do a larger specular highlight that would be as if the shoulder pad itself was smooth, even though there's these wings here. I want to do more of a specular highlight and follow the volumetrics of this shoulder pad. So I'm going to push more of that dark green brown into that and not worry so much about the texture there at this point. And so this takes a couple coats. I just want to make sure I have a nice even base coat or first layer here. So take a few coats and I just push that into that that area, and I follow that line down. So now I'm using caramel brown from the signature series. I'm going to do the same type of thing, but obviously covering a slightly smaller area. Have that line that'll run down the shoulder pad here, and then the specular highlight in the middle. I'm just trying to push that into all the texture here. Now I've added a little ice yellow to the mix, and I'm doing the same thing, just in a slightly smaller area. I'm making sure that that specular highlight, that circle on the wings, is very bold, and that's going to draw your eye to the collar and then to his face here. So I want to make sure that that's blocked in fully. Lastly, I'm coming in here with ice yellow on its own and still just adding that bright highlight spot. Going down the shoulder pad, making sure it shines down that line. Little dot to sell more of the metal effect, and we're good for that initial mapping. So you can see here that that looks good as if there were no texture on it, but we still have to honor that texture. And so I went back in with Violet from Chimera Paints. It's a really dark, almost black purple. And I went in there really thinly and just black lined between the feathers here. And so once I did that, now I got to come back in and I'm going to dot with ice yellow and maybe a little white added in. I'm just going to add little pings, little dots of highlight just to really push that up and honor the individual shapes here a little bit more. But it's important to map out that whole surface as if it was one piece. That's what sells the metal, it being one metal surface. I'm now 14 hours in, and say the base model is pretty well done. Say about 95%. Just some final touches, maybe some final smoothing. But I'm going to start working on the sword now. So work on the sword, get that to a similar level, and yeah, then I'll put it all together and kind of see if I need to do any additional reflections or anything like that, or if there's spots that need more refinement, and I'll start working on his back banner. So plan for the sword is to do a vastly brighter forward edge and then a darker back edge, and then do some glowing effects, some force weapon type of effects on the base of the hilt, and see if that kind of makes a triangle from the plasma pistol, his eyes, probably the banner. I'm going to do some green in there, but also want to have some green on the sword. So I'm going to start plugging away on it. Wish me luck. I didn't mention this before, but I primed this model with Ebony Flesh from Steinel Res or Badger primers. And this is like a cooler brown tone, and mostly just because I don't like going straight to gray or to white on it. I think it's more interesting to use some other colors. And it allowed me to see, like, this metal model is so shiny or whatever and full of lots of little details, but I wanted to manually blackline everything just to get used to all the surfaces and the textures on here. So you can see me doing that on the sword, just kind of getting used to all the different spots on it. So I just used a neutral gray here to kind of map out the initial shine spots. I have the one brightest spot just below the fork part, and then a couple just random little lines, little bright spots, just trying to add some visual interest here. I have no set plan at this point other than just wanting an initial bright spot and just letting the brush kind of flow or what makes the most sense, and keeping it loose right now. So here's where I settled with just that initial gray. I have a couple bright spots towards the tip and below the fork. I'm just going to try to push that up with a little bit more ice yellow and just try to find some bright spots and make it a little random. You don't want it to be too uniform. So I'm going to glaze in some other colors here, so I'm not being too particular about it. I just want to have most of the highlights somewhat mapped out. Coming in here with some pure white just to punch up those ice yellow spots and make it look shiny like steel. I added in a little force fire with some green and some ice yellow. Just wanted to add some kind of magical effect to the sword. Mephiston sword, most of him is about 95% done. So could smooth out some blends, add some more colors, a little bit more glazing, but pretty happy with how he's looking. I think the high contrast I was going for, really dark darks and really bright brights, is looking pretty good. So I'm going to pivot now to his backpack, and my original model had the banner pole, so I figured I would lean into that and paint him up a banner, a back banner. So I always had a soft spot for the back banners for the Space Marines, or really anybody who can justifiably have one. So I made this out of tin foil and masking tape that then I covered with sprue goo, so it gives it a nice firm foundation to paint. And I was able to add some folds and stuff to it, but yeah. So I'm gonna get going on this. As far as like what to do for a back banner for Mephiston, he's never really had one in the fluff or the lore or whatever that I could tell. So I got to design my own, which will be kind of fun. So I think I'm gonna do a fanged skull as like the main center point of it. Probably some wings and something to represent like Mephiston's overcoming of the Black Rage. I don't really decide on that. I think I might symbolize that somehow, maybe some broken chains or something in there, just to give him a little bit of a. Lost my light. Give him a little bit of, that background character that he's famous for. So, yeah, we'll start blocking that out and see how I do. I base coated the banner with wine red, and then I blocked out the initial shapes with the same dark green brown that I used for the non-metallic metal. Now, I'm no freehand master, but I find working from the mid-tone and then working back to a slightly darker tone and then up to a mid-tone highlight again is the best way to work your way through a complex freehand. You can see here that I've mapped out the skull shape, like the eye sockets and the teeth, as well as the two lines that define the wings. And I want to point out that there is a lot that is off with this. The lines on the left wing are too thick and kind of out of place. The space between the nose and the teeth is off and not defined well enough. So that's the next step in this freehand, is to further define all the shapes that I want. This is the longest part of the freehand because you want to make sure you have each of the shapes defined. And specifically for these wings, like each feather needs to have the rough triangle shape. You need to cut in the darker line and the mid-tone. And so it's a back and forth process. You can do mid-tone, back to the darker tone, and just make sure each shape is cut in effectively. If you do your job right here, then from this point on, it should just feel like painting another model. Just like the rest of it, we're just going to add some highlights and some darker tones and just push the contrast on here. Now this might feel like a big jump, but it's really just a couple highlight colors and then coming back in with that violet, just like I did on the rest of the model, defining the lines a little bit more. I also added some bright red to the dark tendrils below, and then some chains breaking to symbolize Mephiston breaking the chains of the Black Rage. The last thing I did was add that little grail between the wings, because as I was painting it and having the feathers come up, it kind of did a negative shape of a grail, and it just seemed like I should add a grail in there. It just seemed to fit. As I said at several points, I just wanted to get the model to about 90 to 95% done, and then I'd come back in and just push the refinement, make the darks a little darker, make the blends a little smoother, add in some interesting colors, and then I can call this piece done. To give you an example of what I mean by refinement, here's the sword, both before I refined it and after. I would say this is the hardest part about competition painting, is deciding how much to work on each of these little parts until you're satisfied with the outcome. You're really only limited by your time, your stamina, and your motivation at this point. When any one of those run out, it's time to call it done. And here's the final result. I clocked in at just under 27 hours on this model, which is a new record for me, especially for the size. It's the smallest, most time spent on any model I've ever done, so really happy with how it looks. I know it's a little different than what you would say the box art is, but I think it turned out really well, and we'll see how I do in the competition. And I'll catch you in the next one.